Welcome to Insider Events Leading into the Future of Work, presented by Adobe. Here's our host, Insider Leadership Editor, Brandon T. Harden.
Hi, I'm Brandon T. Harden, Leadership Editor here at Insider, and your host for today's event, Leading into the Future of Work, presented by Adobe. Business leaders across industries are grappling with how to strengthen their companies during this ongoing period of change characterized by the COVID-19 pandemic and the Great Resignation. These leaders are actively innovating old business models to keep up with industry needs, and big changes are also happening in the workplace. Today's event will try to answer some of the professional world's most relevant questions. How can organizations strengthen their employee value proposition? Why are some small businesses struggling with remote and hybrid work? How will recruiting evolve to meet the needs of today's labor markets? And how can prioritizing diversity and inclusion set up your business for success? We'd love for you to be a part of this conversation. Please share your thoughts about today's panels on social media using the hashtag InsiderEvents. You can also ask our panelists questions by using the dashboard at the bottom of your screen. We love your feedback. And now I'm delighted to introduce our first session. Effective leaders across industries know that the well-being of their employees will need to take center stage when building a vision for the future. Insider Careers Fellow Brittany Nguyen is leading a conversation about the employee value proposition. Over to you, Brittany.
Thank you, Brandon. A record 4.5 million Americans quit their jobs in November, according to the Labor Department. Some workers are leaving jobs where they feel overworked and underpaid, and it's happening across industries. This, of course, has implications for employers. As Americans seek better jobs, employees are feeling the heat, and they need to improve their employee proposition. If employees feel their needs are not being met, they're quitting, and it's in record numbers. Darren Burton, Chief Human Resources Officer at KPMG, and Brian Offit, Chief Workforce Innovation and Operations Officer at Weber Shandwick, know about how industries need to focus on employee well-being. They believe it's a business strategy for the future. Welcome, Darren and Brian.
Thank you, Brittany.
Since April 2021, people have been quitting their jobs en masse, something we've been calling the Great Resignation. But now some are calling it the Great Reshuffle. Darren, we'll start with you. Which one do you think it is and why?
Brittany, I clearly think it's a reshuffle because employees are not leaving or exiting the labor market in mass. They're just really going to opportunities that are better aligned with their needs. And if you think about it this way, we have all gone through a really unique period of time over the past 2 years. We have a shared experience. If you think about COVID, the financial unrest, the political and social unrest, it's impacted all of us. And people's physical and psychological security has been impacted. So employees are just really rethinking exactly what they need, and technology has really advanced their ability to do that. And it's interesting because early on, leaders are making really strong statements about what this new work would look like as far as hybrid is concerned. And I think it was a lack of appreciation for what employees have really gone through and reevaluating what their priorities are. So I truly think it's a reshuffle and people moving to opportunities that are best aligned with their needs.
Brian, I'd also like to follow up with you. What do you think is happening and why?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks again for the chance to be here today. It's great to be in this conversation with you. Like Darren, I do believe it is a reshuffle. And actually, at Weber Shandwick, we've taken to calling it the Great Reappraisal because we think there's a reappraisal that's behind people's decision to shuffle their employment. And when you think about, the historic, life-changing medical events and social and cultural events that have happened across the last couple of years, it's pretty clear that this is a time when people are going to think about what's important to them. And you've written about this topic yourself, Brittany, and I share some of your views too. That I think there are two classes of people who are involved in this, right? One is a group of people who are sort of privileged enough to be able to say, life is short. I want to find purpose and meaning in my work. And if I'm not getting that where I am, I'm going to go find it. And then, of course, there's another group of people who are just struggling to survive. And a lot of those people, of course, are stuck in terrible jobs, right, where they're not treated like human beings, where they're not paid in accordance with their contribution, or certainly in a manner that will allow them to take care of their families. And I think those people are just looking for something better. So, that in a nutshell is what I think is going on.
And based on what both of you are seeing in your own industry as well as across the board, who is, quitting, who's reshuffling the most, and how can employers address those workers? Darren, let's start with you.
So for professional services, we're experiencing the same thing. I mean, we're experiencing historic highs as far as resignations are concerned. But again, going back to the comment about the reshuffle, we're also hiring record numbers at the same time. And primarily, you see this shift occurring in our more junior workforce, anywhere from age 30 to 40. And I think most industries are experiencing the shift in those levels. And what we're experiencing there is really trying to understand exactly what the issues are. So my advice to all organizations is you're going to experience this reshuffle. Truly understand it from a data perspective. So what are the real reasons why people are leaving, and really start to address those concerns. And that's what we've done at KPMG as well. Is we really leaned into a continuous. I think you lost me there for a moment.
Oh. Um,
Did we lose it?
Brian, I'll turn to you now. Are workers more concerned with staying at a company because they align with its missions and values, or are they more compelled by working at a company that they feel well compensated and valued at?
Yeah, well, it's definitely both, right? But your question leads, to a very important point, and that is that I think compensation and benefits are not enough, right? Every research that we're seeing says that. Your own writing has shown that. We've done a bunch of research internally that shows that it is clear that mission and values matter. And again, in this time of a great reappraisal, people are saying, I can do this, right? I can have a job that gives me other things, right? So if compensation and benefits are like table stakes and non-negotiable, the other things that I think people find to be non-negotiable are that they need to work in a workplace that they know will take care of them, right? It's got to be a safe and inclusive workplace. And if that's not being provided, they have no interest in being there. They're going to look for that. And so then once you've got the money right, and once you've got the safe and inclusive workplace, what is going to make a difference to people? We have a consulting division at Weber Shandwick called United Minds. Recently did a massive survey of 2,700 people across industries, and what we have found is that there are three things that are really going to drive people to make decisions about joining and staying at places of work, right? One is the sense of meaningful work, where the work that you get to do allows you in some way to align with your own values and your own sense of purpose in life. And people want to get as close as they can to that. The second is they want autonomy and balance, right? It's not just about work schedule. It's about how you organize your life to do everything in your life that's important to you, because the events of the last 2 years have made very clear to people that the two things are not separable, that they intersect all the time. And then the third thing that really matters to people is something that we call deep fun. And when I say fun, I don't mean like foosball fun. I don't mean, good old fashioned fun and drinks in the office. I mean by that intellectual engagement, right? If people get to do work that they would describe as interesting or satisfying or cool, and really meaningful to them on an intellectual level, that in turn turns into emotional engagement. And that's what we mean by deep fun that keeps people happy in a workplace.
I want to follow up on that and ask, how do these trends that we're seeing in the workforce fit into strengthening a company's employee proposition when they're developing strategies for the future? Darren, what are your thoughts on this? How can this be a way for leaders to retain talent and drive down the resigning or reshuffling in their industries?
Yeah, I think if we've learned anything, Brittany, is that it has to be really central to the business strategy as far as the value proposition is concerned. And I really agree with what Brian is saying. And there's some things that have really risen to the top as far as what employees' needs are. Clearly the issue of mental health and well-being is something that's going to rise to the top and needs to be included in the business strategy and the value proposition. Flexibility and choice is really clear. The next is a true focus on purpose, on values, equity, and inclusion. It really can't be a tagline anymore because, again, based on the shared experience that we've had, people are really evaluating where they want to be able to contribute their talents and spend their time. And they want to be connected to an organization that's aligned with those beliefs. And as I said earlier, and I think I cut out, leaders have to do the hard work of understanding exactly what the challenges are of their workforce. And they need to do that through data and clearly engaging directly with their employees. So they ensure that their policies, their practices, their compensation, their reward systems are really aligned with this new reality. And that's hard work.
Brian, who should have the most responsibility when it comes to carrying out what's in the employee proposition?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And, interestingly enough, Larry Fink addressed it himself earlier this week when he put out his letter and basically said, and I'm paraphrasing him, that, the whole relationship between employees and work has now changed. We're living in a new world. We're not going back. And if I could put it in my own words, this is sort of the era of the employee. Now, given that, I think any company that wants to thrive, right, in this current labor market and this competitive landscape needs to take the onus on itself to be responsible for providing these programs. But that said, when employees invest more of themselves, right, into creating this mission and value and purpose alignment with the company, they get more out of it. And, to give you one example, we have a program that we developed last year in North America and that we're rolling out globally this year called the Talent Compass. And, it, this may seem on the face of it strange, but employees don't always know what it takes to develop and grow in their careers, right? And so we have very systematically and purposely laid out a set of actions, a set of measures, highly quantifiable, very transparent, that people can undertake on their own to really drive their careers forward. And so I believe that those employees who choose to take advantage of that are going to get even more out of it than those who don't. But clearly, the company has to take the lead here, or we're going to be one of those companies where people don't find themselves that interested in being a part.
Darren, I want to ask you this as well. Who do you think is responsible, in organizations and corporations in implementing the employee value proposition?
So it's interesting. My answer may seem a bit curious to you, but clearly, like Brian said, it's leadership and leadership at all levels. It starts at the top, and then it needs to be able to cascade throughout the organization down to managers and anyone responsible for leaders. But employees also need to take responsibility for that value proposition and ensure that they're holding their companies and their leaders accountable for creating the kind of work environment that people would feel good about being a part of. And so at KPMG, we really connected directly with our employees, not only through the surveys and the continuous listening that we talked about, but one great example is when we started thinking about what hybrid work would really look like as we really start to re-enter the workplace, we engage people through focus groups, thousands of employees, to understand exactly what's important to them and how to structure that environment. So clearly, leaders are responsible for creating that environment where we ensure that we understand the proper work environment, the flexibility, the choice that's required, but employees also have to be actively engaged in that conversation to ensure that we get it right.
And Darren, what else should leaders across industries know about strengthening the employee proposition to keep talent at their companies?
I think the first thing is a recognition is that life has changed significantly in forever, and it's really not going back. When I talked about the shared experience that we have, people have been impacted by these events, personally and professionally. And so their whole values around work and how they want to engage with change. So leaders have to understand that those old models of thinking about connection to the the company and the strategy and the objectives, and ensuring that if people are really resonate with them, they have to really rethink that. And so the work world has changed forever. Um, they need to connect with their workforce and truly understand what's important to them, and they have to ensure that they are changing their policies, their practices in a way that is going to really resonate with the talent that they need for their organizations to be successful.
Brian, I would like to ask you the same question, but it's interesting that there's a staffing shortage, but unemployment numbers aren't going up; they're going down. So, where are these people?
Well, there are people who have the ability to play the long game, um, and look for the perfect opportunity. There are people who engage in day trading and cryptocurrency. There are other sorts of entrepreneurial ventures that we're not capturing. There are, unfortunately, a lot of people who are engaged right now in caregiving, more than ever. And there are pockets of people everywhere who are not, being captured in these labor statistics, and so it takes me back to something that Darren said a minute ago, which is that if you want to pull people out of these pockets wherever they happen to be, you have to be a great listener and a deep understander, right, of what is important to people who are your existing employees and your potential employees. Because if you're not, people are going to stay in their pockets for a bit longer. And, as we all know, like Darren, we have hired thousands of people this year because, business is booming. And, um, this, there couldn't be a more fundamental priority when it comes to business strategy, in my view.
And what would you say that leaders should know about implementing the employee proposition at their company, about carrying it out? Brian, I'll ask you.
Yeah, I think it comes down to execution, right? I think there's two things. One, Darren and I have both said, and listen. First, you listen, right? Don't make assumptions. Listen and learn. Be willing to take chances. Be willing to be transparent with your employees, but there is no playbook, right? And so we're going to try a lot of things. If they don't work, we're going to fail quickly. If they do work, we're going to scale quickly. And and then execute. There are lots of great ideas out there. The real secret to success, I think, is the ability to assess the ideas that will work best in your culture and your business climate, and execute on them as quickly and as flawlessly as you can, constantly seeking feedback from your people.
I want to thank both of you, Darren and Brian, for being here today. What we've been hearing in our discussion has been very insightful. And I'll continue to cover this phenomenon and continue investigating where the trends are going, where employees are landing, and how employees are changing recruitment and retention strategies. I want to thank everyone for joining us. A special thank you to Darren and Brian for their insights into strengthening the employee value proposition. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Brittany.
Thank you, Brittany.
Bye now.
Thank you, Brittany, and thank you so much, Darren and Brian. Having a strong focus on employees' well-being will be paramount for leaders of the future. So what about you? What changes would you like to see from your company to improve worker well-being? Share your responses on social media with the hashtag #InsiderEvents. Up next, a group of business and thought leaders will discuss how small businesses can maintain productivity while ensuring everyone feels connected to the company. Please welcome senior entrepreneurship reporter Jennifer Ortakalis-Dawkins and her group of panelists.
Thank you, Brandon. It's been nearly 2 years since the pandemic changed the office as we knew it. COVID-19 accelerated the world's monumental transition to remote work. Major companies like Twitter and Shopify have encouraged their employees to work from home indefinitely. There's no going back. So how do leaders maintain trust and strong human connection with their remote employees? And is that dynamic different for small businesses? Our panelists have the answers. Sadal Neely is a business administration professor at Harvard Business School, and Todd Gerber is the vice president of Adobe Document Cloud. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Sadal, you wrote a book about this very topic titled Remote Work Revolution. It's based on your decades of research about the digital workplace and companies that embraced remote work long before the pandemic happened. You mentioned how building trust with employees looks different when your team is remote. How does it look different?
So trust is so important for work and for performance because it's really the glue that binds teams together. And so when you're not sharing the same space, when you don't get a chance for water cooler conversations, when you don't get a chance to have frequent contact with someone, how do you know whether they're reliable and how do you sustain that? So in a remote work environment, trust is one of the most examined factors. And you have to think of it in terms of a palette of trust. There are two types of trust that are important to know. The first one is called cognitive trust, and it's grounded in the understanding that your collaborators or your team members are reliable and competent. So once you understand those things, you have to confer trust right away and begin the work. The second type of trust is called emotional trust, and it's grounded in the understanding that others care about you. They care about your interests. They care about your aspirations. They care about your difficulties, your preferences. And so emotional trust is developed through self-disclosure, so others know those things about you, and it's also developed through time spent together, important time spent together. And so with those types of trust, people can work very effectively remotely.
That's a great point. Thank you. Now, Todd, Adobe conducted a study that found workers and business owners are finding it harder to balance their personal time with remote work. How can companies encourage work-life balance and prevent burnout?
Thanks. A key part of remote or hybrid work is really leaning into flexibility and focusing on employees' well-being, evolving the culture of an organization, helping to foster that positive environment really helps to reduce the potential for burnout. And it can really start with small, simple steps. For example, at our company, we recognize the need to allocate small breaks between video meetings. Otherwise, you just get the end-to-end, back-to-back all day long. So if it's a 30-minute meeting, starting 5 minutes after the hour, or an hour starting 10 minutes, this gives you time to regroup, context switch, stretch your legs. Because if you're in a physical environment, you would have time to walk to and from a meeting room or up or down a flight of stairs or get on an elevator to transit to your next location. And I think in the early days, the one thing we all recognized was we weren't giving ourselves the time to do that, and just giving that and acknowledging, hey, it's time for lunch. Let's all break because we don't have a cafe to go to have the food prepared for us. We actually needed to take the time to do that. So respecting those dimensions and giving those little micro breaks throughout the day go a long way in helping to avoid that burnout that this accumulates over time. The other thing that a lot of companies do, ours does as well, is having wellness days off, where we all collectively take the same amount of time during the same window of time so that you get a chance to really recharge. It's super important to do that.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Sadal, how is leading a small remote company different from leading a large remote company?
You know, when you are smaller, the likelihood that you know every member of your group is much greater. So there's a lot more familiarity, and you can do a lot more. So for example, companies like Cul-de-sac and other smaller companies who have decided to be remote first companies get together on a quarterly basis or biannual basis where they just invest on team building, team bonding, getting excited about their purpose and their values, and then go back to their respective places of work and continue their collaboration efforts. In big companies, you can't do that. You can't do that if you have 10,000 people, 20,000, 100,000 people. So with larger companies, you have to make sure that the connection and the bonding and the values are shared through culture and through strong leadership. So you have to articulate what the culture you want to be and enact it every single day through your leaders, because you can't get together easily with everyone and have more personal touch with others. That's a huge difference between a small company and a large company. Culture has to drive so much more in a large company where interpersonal connections cannot be made as well as you can in a small organization.
That's a really helpful differentiation. So Todd, how has remote work changed the tools and software we use to work?
Yeah, as you mentioned earlier, we conducted a survey where we talked to over 5,500 people across SMBs and enterprises, and a couple of key things that came out of that study was people were looking for technology to help them work faster and more efficiently. Some of the key things that we learned were these modest effort but time-consuming tasks like managing files, forms, contracts, payments, invoices, all those things that are necessary to help keep a business going, require a significant amount of time. On average, a typical worker spends a third of their work week on mundane, repetitive tasks. And 86% of enterprise workers and 83% of SMB workers, so pretty similar, said that these are the tasks that get in the way of doing their jobs more effectively and delivering on the higher value work product that they need to produce. 91% of these individuals are interested in tools that will make tasks simpler and easier and more efficient so that they can spend their time on the things that more matter. So technology itself is needing to get simpler, get out of the way, get the thing done that it needs to do in the most efficient way possible so that people can invest that time savings, not doing more application-based things, but the thinking that really helps to grow and scale a business.
You know what this reminds me of, Todd, is the extent to which COVID has accelerated technology advancements and adoptions all over the place. I remember a time when people were being begged to use Slack and other internal social media, and then it becomes a lifeline and people use it quite regularly. So the acceleration of digital tools and adoption of digital tools has just been so great to see, actually, to make work better. Do you think that's the case? Is the quality of people's time at work getting better?
Absolutely. We've also seen too in a lot of the customers that we work with and prospects as well, transforming digital transformation has become it was on the list of things to do from an IT or a chief digital change officer, really looked at elevating that. The pandemic spurred the need to move processes that were sometimes hybrid. They were a little bit digital, but still culminated in a paper-based process, or things that were 100% in person and very slow moving to go 100% digital. So we've seen that elevate as a need across small and large organizations, and combining the right set of tools to be able to get that work done. Think of too, and we have the Great Resignation, but also a great amount of hiring that's happening. A lot of the onboarding of a new employee in the past was heavily paper-based, very things needed to shuffle from department to department and across an organization. Now that's all possible to do 100% digitally, from the moment that an employee accepts an offer letter to how they onboard with the technology and the tools and the equipment that they're going to use to be able to get their work done.
Yeah, those are both really great points. And thank you for bringing that up, Sadal. The transition from paper to technology, and even some of these technologies we've had for so many years, now just that much faster coming into normal use. And so, Todd, do you have any kind of examples of maybe a couple technologies we can be on the lookout for advancements in the next year or so?
I think things that, there's a lot of personal productivity that has been in the workplace for a long period of time, word processing, Excel, PowerPoints. It's really things that accelerate business processes that we're seeing more and more customers and use cases that customers come to us looking to solve. How can they accelerate something that in the past has taken weeks to get done down to hours, and the ability to audit where are you in the respective process? Is it at the beginning? Has the people that you've sent it out to responded? And being able to track that throughout the system helps to better understand where are the the shortfalls in that process? How can you unplug or change your process to better accelerate? So technology helps to illuminate the data that you're able to get, can point a bright light on areas that you can better improve within your organization. And it helps making not just working more efficiently within your own organization, but usually all businesses are working with other businesses to be able to deliver their services and their goods. So it helps everyone at the end of the day to simplify and accelerate how work gets done.
That's really exciting. Now, Sadal, what are some ways remote work can cut operational costs for both small and large companies?
It's interesting because remote work, I want to mention, and hybrid work, they're not new. They've been around for a long time, but for a smaller portion of our population. But today, it's a much, much larger group. And so we have a lot of data, decades old data, that shows us what are some of the cost benefits of remote work. So obviously, one is real estate, right? If you look at Cisco, started to experiment with remote and hybrid work in the 1990s. Then you had Sun Microsystem, later on acquired by Oracle, and even the US Patent Office has been experimenting with both work from anywhere and work from home for several years. And so real estate is the first thing that organizations tend to reduce. And with Sun Microsystem, they saved some $500 million worth of real estate in a short time. For smaller organizations, it's the same thing, right? The overhead cost to run a physical business, unless that's necessary for your work. Of course, retail is very different, is the first place. So if you think about what remote work is, ultimately is if you set people up in their homes with the right technologies, broadband, lighting, cameras, and other things, then they can work. The one huge debate, however, that affects big and small companies is people are giving up their personal homes or real estate in order to work for organizations. So should people get paid to work from home? So should there be an additional cost increase or salary increase to subsidize some of the money and space that people are giving up is part of the big debate today that I think is going to get resolved. But for companies, the savings from a financial standpoint is huge.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. And Todd, what should an employer consider when hiring remotely?
I think there are a couple of things to keep in mind. One is looking beyond the usual hiring locations. I happen to live in the Bay Area, which is an amazing part of the country. And typically we tend to look in our backyard. There's an amazing set of talent here. But this sea change that we've seen in the workplace opens up a world of possibilities, not just within this country, but outside the country as well, in terms of looking for top talent. I think, though, you have to balance that with time zones. You know, you want to make sure that there's cohesion across the team, that you're not taxing some member of the team to dial into calls at 12 o'clock at night when it's 9 o'clock somewhere else in the world, or 8 o'clock in the morning for that matter. So that's an important to balance. I also think too that there will always be moments that matter where, you know, remote doesn't mean disconnected. I almost think of it, remote and hybrid work is the most connected work that you can experience, and you need to foster that engagement in a rich way for people that you don't see every day in a physical environment. But I say these moments that matter, where you still are going to have a few in-person meetings. So making sure that the candidate that you're looking to hire, when it's safe to do so, is comfortable getting on a plane and coming for those moments that matter, like customer visits or offsites where you're planning multi-year strategy, for example. So yeah, my analogy is remote work is connected work, and you're not remote and never seen. You know, there are still going to be these moments in time where you meet up in the physical world too.
I love that. And you know, it's interesting too, because some companies do this quite well, kind of the onboarding once you hire people, where they say for the first 2 months, 3 months, we actually want to see you more in person. Then you can move to hybrid or remote if that's what you want, but immerse yourself in our physical space if you're able, if you're domestic or if you're local. But I love the distinction you make that remote work is connected work. Remote I mean, the term remote itself suggests that you're kind of pulled away, but actually you're not, and technology enables that. I love that connection that you make.
How do you preserve a organization, a departmental or a company culture? And Sadal, what you mentioned is that immersion. Like that's one of the for somebody that's coming in from outside of that organization, you want to bring their fresh perspective to help expand the culture, but also make sure that they're a part of what makes that organization unique and special. Oftentimes, in addition to the job and who you're working for, the company values and what they stand for matter, and you want to make sure that that's infused in all of your employees, regardless of what type of way in which they choose to work. And so that's super important for any organization, and something we've at Adobe have really made sure that it's what makes us special and unique, and we want to preserve that with this expansion to more hybrid and remote work.
Yeah, those are great points. Thank you. And I love that point about remote work is not disconnected work, and to keep in mind for all companies, CEOs, leaders, business owners, that they really need that connection with their employees no matter what. So next, I would love to ask Sadal, how can remote employees work more efficiently?
Efficiently without blurring the boundaries between work and non-work lives, without experiencing tech exhaustion that Todd touched on earlier, this idea that you need to build in transition times, because part of what we saw, especially in the first year of the pandemic, is people were working up to 6.8 hours longer per week, and leading to burnout and the blurring of the boundaries all over the place. So you have to make sure that you're very clear about the hours that you work. And to make sure, especially for leaders, don't confuse people and send mixed signals by saying we care for your well-being, but yet sending emails at 8 o'clock at night. We can't do those things. We have to make sure that we model the right behaviors. But efficiently means we start at a certain time, we end at a certain time. Efficiency means the use of synchronous and asynchronous technologies. Efficiency means shorter meetings. Just because we need to resolve things in meetings doesn't mean that we need an hour every single time. Parkinson's law suggests that the amount of time that we allocate to a meeting is the amount of time it turns out that we need for that particular task. So 40-minute, half-hour meetings are perfectly fine as well to get things done. So we need to build that muscle as well. So I'll pause there. The big question.
Yes, thank you. And Todd, similarly, how can a company be fully remote and highly productive?
I'll echo a couple of things that I think synthesize the conversation that we've had so far. I think number one is adopting a flexible mindset. Number two is investing in your people, their health and well-being. That's the gas that makes it all run. And number three, leverage the best practices in technology to help remove friction from employees so that they can focus their time and efforts on the things that matter.
Sadal and Todd, thank you very much for being a part of this insightful conversation. We've learned that the future of remote work is here. Now it's time for business owners and leaders to invent a new future by adapting their employees' needs, utilizing new technology, and creating empathetic policies. We'll continue to cover this topic and more, so be sure to follow our small business coverage at Insider. Back to you, Brandon.
Thank you, Jennifer, Sadal, and Tom. And thank you all for watching. Please remember to take our survey at any time during the event. Just click on the icon at the bottom of your page. If you're sharing thoughts on social media, please remember to use the hashtag #InsiderEvents. We all know that recruiting models have changed. Our next session touches on worker autonomy, the new talent model, and how leaders will find workers during the Great Resignation. Please welcome Rebecca Knight, senior correspondent here at Insider, and her guests.
Thank you, Brandon. I'm Rebecca Knight, senior correspondent at Insider and your host for this segment, Reimagining the Talent Model. In the era of the Great Resignation, attracting and retaining workers is a crucial priority for organizations. Doing so requires they develop a wide range of management and recruitment strategies. What do those strategies look like? How can they be deployed? And what can organizations as well as individual managers do to secure the talent their businesses need to grow? These are the questions we're going to be talking about today. Joining me, we have two experts. We have Arvind Malhotra. He is the Professor of Strategy and Entrepreneurship at UNC's Keenan-Flagler School of Business. Thanks so much for joining us, Arvind.
My pleasure.
And we also have Catherine Minshew. She is the founder and CEO of The Muse. That's the career advice website. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I want to start with you, Catherine, talking a little bit about this so-called era of the Great Resignation. We know that the reasons behind why people are quitting their jobs are varied and complex, but you're someone who really has an eagle-eye view of this. What are you hearing and seeing from workers about why they want to leave their jobs in these record numbers?
It's a really interesting time. And I think, like you said, you can see it so clearly in the data. We have never had so many people choosing to leave their jobs at the same time. I think there's a few different factors at play. First of all, we're seeing that a lot of people have become much more conscious of their own values and preferences over the last 2 years, and they're actually starting to vote with their feet by changing to employers that have more flexible hours, that offer better pay or benefits, that treat them with more respect in some cases. You could almost say that the COVID pandemic acted as this kind of collective shock or this near-death experience that really made a lot of people say, well, what do I care about? What matters to me? And for many people, part of the changes that they're making in their lives are around their career and around their job. We're also seeing unprecedented competition for talent. The balance of power between employees and employers has shifted very, very dramatically in favor of the employee and the candidate, which is frankly very hard for a lot of businesses, but is something I think we all have to accept. And I think that there's also these really interesting generational dynamics at play, where you have a lot of Gen Z and millennial workers who have grown up in a world where technology is frictionless and easy to use. The media products that they use are often personalized to their interests. And so when they enter the workforce, it's somewhat natural that many of them would say, well, why can't I work in the way that I want to? Why can't I work with an employer that is willing to be flexible to my needs and preferences and not just have a one-size-fits-all approach? So I know we're going to dig more into this today, but I think there are so many layers here. I think the bottom line is that if you are a hiring manager or a leader, you cannot expect the future to look like the past. We are in a very different era. We are seeing the rise of the values-based job seeker. We're seeing businesses start to realize that to retain their existing people, not to mention attract new ones, they have to behave very differently. And I think ultimately long-term, that has the potential to be really exciting, but short-term, it's going to be really hard for a lot of people.
Right. So many employers are facing a lot of challenges and struggling to hold on to people and to recruit new people. Arvind, the topic that you have studied for a long time is on worker autonomy. Can you describe a little bit, piggybacking off of what Catherine was saying about worker sentiment, or should I say worker disillusionment, how the idea of worker autonomy is playing out in the workforce today and in terms of what people are looking for from their jobs?
I think it's, instead of great resignation, it's great migration. And the migration is towards jobs, as Catherine said, that offer flexibility, autonomy, two same words. And the autonomy is of four types that people are seeking. First one is, where do I work? That's the locational. The second one is when do I work, which is timing. These two we fixate a lot on. But the other two, which are the higher levels are, what do I work on? What's the nature of my task? And who do I work with? What kind of teams am I working with? What's the collaborative environment that I'm working in? So those are the four levels of autonomy that they seek, and they migrate from jobs that have lower autonomy to the jobs that have higher autonomy.
So in terms of what you're seeing right now, in terms of how employers can attract workers by giving them more autonomy, are there any specific examples you're seeing in terms of employers that are doing the right things in your mind and appealing to workers who are seeking that autonomy?
For sure. There have been leading companies who pre-pandemic offered this kind of extreme autonomy. 3M offers employees to work on projects, 15% of their time to work on projects that they like. The other example is Gore Picks, which again lets you work on projects that are central to your interest and to accumulate teams around those projects. And then Pixar is ever famous for being this paragon of creativity where there's a great deal of autonomy in what needs to get accomplished, the goals of the company, the movie that they're trying to make. But within that, a lot of individual and group autonomy is offered to the employees.
So, Catherine, Arvind has just gone through a couple of examples that he's seen. What are some best practices that you've seen emerge as business leaders and employers are thinking more creatively, more innovatively in terms of how to hold on to their best people?
Yeah. So first of all, I love that you frame the question as, you have to think about how to hold on to your best people. You can no longer just expect that if you do the same old as an employer, you'll be able to retain and engage your top talent because everyone else is fighting so hard for them that if you don't too, you're often going to be left in the dust. So some of the things we're seeing. So we recently did a survey of users on the Muse. 67% were likely or very likely to change jobs in the next 12 months. And the top 3 factors that they were drawn toward when thinking about their next opportunity were work-life balance, learning and growth opportunities, and the team culture, people, and environment. So what does that mean? I think work-life balance, this has been a really hot topic since the beginning of the pandemic, but people are looking for a fair bit of flexibility in how work gets done. It's not just the question of in-office, remote work, or hybrid, but also, if someone needs to leave early or come late because of a family concern, a doctor's appointment, do you allow your employees flexibility? If you don't in certain cases, can you give them a compelling reason why? I've found through years of working with different generations, but especially Gen Z and millennial talent at the Muse, what we see is that businesses that are really clear about their policies, here's what we can do, here's why we can't, who give their workers a sense of respect and autonomy, are much, much more successful than those that just say, this is the rule, or, because I said so, which frankly, no one liked when they were 5. Really, really, really don't like it as an adult. So that work-life balance and flexibility is number 1 across all of our survey respondents in terms of what they're looking for. Second, I mentioned learning and growth opportunities. This one's really interesting because I think there was such an economic shock at the beginning of the pandemic with layoffs, the stock market falling, a really just deep sense of uncertainty that we're seeing a lot of employees want to invest in themselves. They want to build up their skill set. They want to future-proof themselves. And so they're looking for employers that are going to commit right back to them by investing in their learning and growth. And so I think companies, hiring managers who want to attract great talent, think about, what are you doing as far as L&D or professional development? What can you share externally? Can you spotlight the stories of individual employees who have grown at your company or who have acquired new skills? And how can you really send that message? And then third, team culture, employee experience and people. I love seeing this one come up. And by the way, these were all 3 higher than compensation, which was 4th on the list, and benefits and perks were 5th. So all 3 of these came up higher. And I think team culture, environment, people values, this speaks to the desire that a lot of people have after COVID to do something that they enjoy. Life is very short. And I think the pandemic reinforced for a lot of people how precious time is. And so we're absolutely seeing a lot of job seekers say, I will not work for a disrespectful boss. I want to be surrounded by colleagues that I enjoy working with. And what a company culture and environment is like, not everyone is looking for the same thing, which is great, honestly. But I think people are really asking smart questions. And that includes things like diversity and inclusion, which we can also talk more about.
Cultivating diverse and inclusive cultures is so critical, as Catherine has pointed out. But Arvind, it is really, really hard, particularly when so many people are still working from home or some working hybrid. Not everyone is together all the time. How are employers managing this, or are they managing this, I should say? And what do you advise them to do when they're struggling with how to kind of create the kind of culture that people want to work for?
Yes, I like your question. Are they doing it? Yes, they're all trying to do it and really hard. The variety of work options from hybrid to coming into the office and pure virtual has exploded to that extent. And as Catherine has said, people have the flexibility to choose whichever way when they want to come to the office, they want to come to the office. But when they don't want to come, they don't want to be forced into coming. And so what all of this does is it leads to the big struggle with culture. How do you maintain a culture? How do you inculcate a culture in a new employee when you onboard them? So the culture part is the one that's the struggle for everyone, which Catherine's right. If you translate that into rules, nobody wants rules to be laid, but they do want to understand what the norm of working in the workplace is. And they're choosing workplaces based on what they think is the culture. So the faster the companies figure out how to explain their culture through actions, the better it is for them to attract new talent and to keep their talent, for that matter.
I love that you said that. And I think that one thing that's both been a real challenge and an opportunity of the last, 18 to 24 months is that the shift to virtual for so many people has forced them to actually articulate their culture in language, in specifics, rather than just saying, oh, we have a beautiful office, we have free snacks, we have a ping pong table. A ping pong table is not culture. And so in terms of what I'm seeing that is really effective, first of all, I think that, great culture, and especially communicating culture authentically externally, starts with listening to your existing employees. It starts with asking the people who are currently at your company, what is it like to work here? What are some of the things that keep people engaged here? What are some of the things that foster disengagement or frustrate people here? And really understanding what is the texture of life at your company? What are the norms? How does work get done? What, is it a mile a minute, go, 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 or more consistent? There's a lot of ways to work. And I think we need to move away from the idea that there's something is like the best company to work for, because really it's what's best for a particular individual and their preferences and needs. And so as a leader, if you listen to your people, you can then take the things that are benefits or success stories and use those to amplify to candidates, but also the things that are challenges, I believe you should communicate to candidates as well. And ideally, you should try and make those things better. Not everything all at once. Employees understand that no workplace is perfect, but you can really go a long way by committing to a few of the most high priority things and making, clear, decisive changes. And I think for candidates, if you can genuinely communicate, here are some of the things that people occasionally find frustrating. Here are some of the things we're working on. It's much, much more successful to bring someone in who knows what they're getting into and has opted in than to have a new employee join, have them start a job and think to themselves, this is not what I expected. That is not helpful for you. It is not helpful for the employee. It leads to a lot of retention and morale issues. I think ultimately it's a very positive thing that employers are being forced to articulate culture. And I said this at the beginning, but using the words of your employees is absolutely my recommendation. Let people tell their story about your company. That's much more compelling than kind of corporate speak about being, an innovative place to work.
Arvind, do you think that these strategies that you and Catherine are talking about differ for small and medium enterprises versus the larger organizations?
They don't differ per se, but I think it's much harder to, in a small company, you can enact your culture. You can experience your culture. You can see it on a day-to-day basis, and the size is that small that it can get communicated very easily, as Catherine says. It's about communicating your culture. But the larger your size is, it's much harder to explain, and it's highly variant from team to team, from group to group, from division to division. That can create a lot of chaos in itself. People work on multiple teams. So to them, the culture is the things that they see across teams and groups, and they think that is the real culture. And many times it comes across wrong rather than what you really want to communicate to your employees, that this is actually our culture. And to add to Catherine, I think it's two things, which is you have to exemplify it. What are the things that have been done by other employees in their own words that is representative of their culture, sharing these stories, plus and minuses, no problem on that account. But it has to be amplified by the executives, the leaders, by time and time reiterating what the culture really is, what they think is the culture, and then telling them through stories and actions and enactments that we're recognizing so and so because they exemplify our culture. This is what they did. So those stories are really critical especially as we go more virtual in communicating a culture when you cannot experience it in person.
The responsibility of the executives, but also the frontline managers who play such a critical role in the employee experience.
I think one of the things that's important for leaders at any level is to communicate support for authenticity in the recruiting process. People who are interviewing, people who are meeting with candidates, they're constantly taking their cues from others. Do I need to just paste a smile on and say, everything's amazing here and we're the best at everything? Or can I say, I love working here. Here are some of the things that are great. Here are some of the things that are particular or challenging or that you should just know before you join. I think having the awareness, even if you're a small piece of a much bigger organization, of what do your direct reports think about life on your team, life in your corner of the organization, and can you personally communicate that to candidates? Can you empower your directs or your team to communicate that in interviews? And can you do your part to help raise awareness within the broader organization about the value of understanding your culture, articulating it clearly? I think that there was an article published right before the holidays that we might be nearing the end of the Great Resignation. And, I think it's just wishful thinking, to be very honest. I think it's obviously very disruptive, the number of employees that are changing jobs. But I think we're in for quite a ride. I honestly believe that we're in for 2 additional waves of the Great Resignation. And so I think the sooner that companies can, get comfortable with the fact that they have to invest real time and energy in both recruiting and retention, the better off we are all going to be.
I know neither of you have any crystal balls rolling around in the backgrounds of your office, but I'd love you to both look to the future. As Catherine said, we're not really anywhere near the end of this Great Resignation and the labor shortage. It's not going away anytime soon. So what do you think the future holds for organizations as they reimagine their talent models? Arvind, how about I'll start with you?
I think one trend is fluidity in employment. There's freelance work, and in journalism, it's already been here for quite a long time. I see the shades of those, the flavors of those reaching other organizations that are not in journalism or media. Freelance work is here, and if certain organization doesn't offer them that kind of flexibility or autonomy, then they choose to work for another company at any given time. So the fluid nature of employment, I would agree with Catherine. I think it's not over. I think there's several ways to go. And I don't even think it's ways. It's just norms of being an organization. If you do not articulate and represent your culture correctly, the moment they join, they're easily going to exit it at the same time. So I think a lot of fluid employment, I don't want to call it freelance, I don't want to call it gig work, but I think fluidity in employment is here for the long run.
No, I both strongly agree with that. And I think that, we are going to continue to see workers of all ages and demographics, but especially Gen Z and millennial workers vote with their feet towards organizations that align with their values, that offer a motivating and respectful workforce, or that meet other, again, specific needs. Not every company needs to be the same. This is really good news, but companies do need to have a clear sense of who they want to be. They need to deliver on the promises that they make to the market. And I think that employees and candidates are holding us all accountable. And so, I mentioned, I do believe there will be at least 2 more waves. I'm certainly think that this is going to be an ongoing phenomenon when businesses start to design and enact return to office plans or really any sort of certainty. So many employers right now are in a bit of pandemic-induced limbo. And once companies start to come out of that and say, this is how work will get done going forward here, many employees are going to find that that doesn't align with the way they want to work going forward. And I think we're going to see just a real long-term sense of reassessment and reshuffling in the workforce. So some challenging waters ahead, but I also think that if you can attract people that are really committed to what you are offering and what you are doing, the upside in terms of engagement, productivity, and retention is very, very strong long-term.
Catherine, Arvind, thank you so much. Lots of great advice and great recommendations for employers and managers alike. I'm Rebecca Knight. Back to you, Brandon.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Arvind and Catherine. Tapping into the power of every employee requires businesses to build diversity, equity, and inclusion into the very fabric of the organization's strategy and leadership. For our final session, Please welcome Insider leadership correspondent Marguerite Ward and her panelists for a conversation on the importance of unleashing the power of all. Over to you, Marguerite.
Thank you, Brandon. Hi, I'm Marguerite Ward, leadership correspondent at Insider. It's an honor to be your moderator for this session, Unleashing the Power of All. The role of the CEO, and for that matter, all leadership positions, is rapidly changing. Think of the events of the past 2 years. Then add to that the trends of automation, the climate crisis, social media, and the changing nature of business. CEOs and executives have to contend with all of that. At the core of the changing nature of the CEO is ESG, which stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance Principles. According to a recent survey by EY, 82% of US CEOs see themselves focusing on ESG more over the next few years. That's in large part because consumers, investors, and employees are demanding it. Today, we're honing in on that S of ESG, the social perspective. How do leaders build incredible workforces? How do they attract and retain top talent? And how do they develop specific diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies? We'll be discussing those topics and more today. I'm delighted to introduce our guests. Terrence Irizarry, the Chief Inclusive Diversity Officer at Danone North America. Danone is the company behind products like Dannon Yogurt, Silk Almond Milk, Evian Water, and other top products. Also joining us is Janine Swa, the expert in residence at Brex, a financial services company valued at $12.3 billion. Janine focuses on culture and equity building in venture capital. Terrence, Janine, thank you so much for joining me. Terrence, I'd love to start with you. Danone has been a trailblazer in DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. In December 2020, Danone North America extended its general parental leave policy of up to 26 weeks to all employees, including manufacturing and factory workers. That's something you rarely hear about in the US. Several months ago, I spoke with Danone's North America CEO, Shane Grant, about this, but this is squarely in your wheelhouse. How has that decision changed your company?
Oh, it's a great question, and thank you, Marguerite. And first, thank you very much for having me. It's really an honor to be here on the panel and be able to talk about such an important topic, and to be here with Janine as well. So thank you so much. I think Danone, we're very proud at Danone North America about the work that we've done around our parental bonding. And in terms of, just to take a step back, in terms of why we made such an important decision, it was around understanding that we need to meet the various needs of our employees, and understanding and appreciating that the family structure is one that's evolving. And by implementing a policy like this, I like to think about it as it's really about walking the talk. If we are committed to inclusive diversity, both internally and externally, we need to provide not only an environment, but policies and programs and procedures that demonstrate that commitment, and therefore allow our employees to feel that commitment directly. In terms of how it's changed our organization, as you mentioned, I think what we're talking about here is that we give a total of 18 weeks of leave paid at 100% of salary to all of our employees. And that's important. And the way it's changed our and impacted our organization is that the fact that we've been able to do this not only in our corporate offices, but within our manufacturing locations, demonstrates how much of a priority it is to be able to really provide benefits and policies that benefit our employees and support our employees. So it's changed in the way that people feel as though we are backing up what we've said, both internally and externally. Doing this work in manufacturing means that we have to allow and be able to support our organization by providing coverage. And that's the challenge in doing this, to be quite direct about doing this in manufacturing. But at Danone North America, we really said that this is so important and such a priority to us that we will figure out how to do that and ensure that our plants and our manufacturing locations are able to remain at our high level of productivity. And we were able to do that. So the feeling within Danone now, after we were able to pass that, is really positive. It's really one of inclusion, and it's one of excitement about the fact that we're really committed to providing support to our employees.
And I love that. It really shows how DEI isn't just unconscious bias training or a town hall. It's benefits and policies that require work. What was the biggest challenge in implementing such a project?
The biggest challenge was really around um, the piece that I mentioned, right? It's that how do we provide that level of flexibility? Meaning that 18 weeks, and in some cases for the parent or employee, if they're the person that gave birth to a child, they're eligible for an additional 6 weeks. So now we're at 24 weeks, and that's a significant amount of time. So the hardest part of that was really about understanding what I'll call workforce planning, is how do we create a mechanism and operationalize this thought process of one of our employees needs that time to bond with a new child that has entered their family. So that is important and that is a priority. So the hardest part though was how do we sustain our business in that way, right? In terms of whether it's resourcing, staffing, and knowledge. And that was the hardest part of how do we do that, especially in a production environment where you need someone, on the line to be there. And I'm really happy and proud that we were able to figure those things out through, being strategic in how we create our teams, being strategic in workforce planning, and then being committed to be able to, quite frankly, provide the financial support that's needed to be able to sustain our business while these folks are out bonding and enjoying that time with their new family member.
Janine, thanks so much for joining us as well. You're in a different position. You help build company cultures from the outside. You're talking with new CEOs and entrepreneurs all the time. What are you excited about in the DEI space right now? What are you hearing from the next wave of leaders in terms of what they're prioritizing?
Oh my gosh, there's so many things. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be with you and Terrence today. What I think I'm the most excited about is the freedom and flexibility to be an autonomous worker. I think the corporate world and like startup culture are starting to emerge in terms of how we're able to work and get things done. And I think that from a diversity standpoint, when it comes to remote work, making sure that your employees have what they need, specifically in the high growth startup space, is key because that's how you can build brand loyalty and that's how you can also attract top tier talent. So I think that a lot of the startups, especially at Brex right now, we're really just focused on building that culture. And I'm still very new to the organization and I'm honestly like in love. And, here I am in Miami, Florida, getting to develop my own schedule while still staying on task because we feel like the company is trusting of us. So it's just, I think there's just so many things, but overall, I would say the remote flexibility and autonomy.
Yeah, we'll dive into that more later because flexibility and autonomy are DEI issues. Terrence, what about you? What are you excited about right now at Danone North America that you're working on in terms of DEI?
Oh, it's a great question. I'm like Janine. I get excited even thinking about the question and being able to talk about this topic. For me, the biggest thing I'm excited about is the opportunity that Danone and companies like ours have to have a positive impact in our communities. One thing that's happened as a result of the last 2 years, whether it's, the impact of the pandemic or of the, racial and social injustice that took place and really provided an opportunity for organizations to focus in. What I'm excited about is organizations are starting to realize that, to your point, it's not just unconscious bias. It's about how do you authentically connect with diverse communities. So for me at Danone, we're excited because we're able to do that in various ways just because of the nature of our company. Our mission is to provide health through food to as many people as possible. So it's already in line with what our purpose and mission is to reach out into the communities. So I'm excited about the opportunity, for instance, to impact people's ability to eat healthy, or to educate people about the benefits of plant-based products, or to just simply provide, needed food in areas that may be underserved or that just need assistance, and Janone can play a role there. So as of recently, between like relationships with organizations like the Green Bronx Machine or other types of relationships, Feeding America, we're able to get out there and touch and have authentic relationships with diverse communities. And that's what, for me, I'm really, really excited about, because, doing the work and putting out statements and those things are great, but being able to see and touch the impact is super exciting.
I can feel both of your energy radiating off of the screen. And it's great that there's that energy in the DEI space, but it's hard work. Janine, what are the challenges CEOs are still grappling with when it comes to DEI? Let's start with you, Janine.
I think a lot of it comes with just letting go of your own biases and really just honing in. And what I mean by letting go of your own biases is that you can have the best intentions of the world, but sometimes your actions may come across as tone deaf. And so I think that we're coming at a time where people have the opportunity to be very intentional and very authentic and genuine, and very much like Terrence said, like, it's not just lip service. There are, when George Floyd, there were tons of companies who were like, yeah, we commit to doing this for diverse people. We commit to doing this for Black people. But what was really happening was it was just claims and commitments, not true action. And so I think that overall, that's what needs to be implemented right now. And that intentionality and also that authenticity is really huge.
Janine, do you feel that that energy is still there, that CEOs are still committed to this? The protests from the chants of the killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery have died down. Is that still happening in corporate America?
I feel like now more than before, and to be quite honest, I feel like now more than before, people are actually taking action to build out more diverse ecosystems within their own startups and within their own businesses. And because I work in the startup space and where venture capital funding, the disparities amongst that of female founders, which was just released, it was less than 2% last year. I think that now people are realizing, like, numbers don't lie and numbers are facts. So it's like, okay, what can we do and to be able to invest in DEI, whether it's by gender, whether it's by race and diversity, whether it's by sexual orientation, religion, what have you. I think that people are starting to pick up on diversity of thought leads to higher ROI, because when you have people from different spaces who think in different ways, you're able to discover different TAMs. So different markets when it comes to just like total addressable markets. And so I think that that's what the startup scene is really starting to realize, especially with the emergence of Web3, of just that equity and ownership of women taking over the Web3 NFT space and having that opportunity to be able to immerse themselves in spaces that, maybe we weren't given the opportunity before in the more corporate setting.
Absolutely. Terrence, what about you? What's the challenge that you're facing in your role?
Sure, no, it's a really relevant topic and question. I think the challenges, especially for a larger size corporation, is that the topics that we're talking about, whether it's equality, equity, social justice, racial justice, there in society itself, there is a tendency to politicize a lot of these topics. And then what happens is organizations then might shy away from or be afraid to be very, to be in the forefront or to be proactive in terms of how they're talking about and addressing certain topics. And I think that how many organizations, but specifically at Danone North America, the way that we've taken, in terms of meeting that challenge is that we continue to connect our work to our purpose-driven nature as an organization. The concept of treating someone with respect is not a political issue. And I think at organizations, the challenge is to keep those two things separate, right? It's about understanding that when you come to work, whether work is in a physical form or what we're talking about today in the future of work, where it could be remote, it's about how are you able to treat people with a level of respect and appreciation, which to Janine's point, because we know if we do that and we give people the opportunity to be their authentic self at work, the level of productivity, the level of your ability to retain talent, people's level of engagement goes up. All these things are positive results. So it's a good thing for the organization. It's just a matter of how do you make sure that you are disconnected, if you will, from some of the political issues that are out in our society and focus it in on how do we treat each other and how do we treat our consumers and candidates and all this different stakeholders that we deal with.
Yeah, it's really about sticking to your core business values and integrating DEI into that, right?
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And it's about highlighting the fact that this is part of the way that you do business,
Right.
right? And it's a matter of integration, and that's the challenge. It's not a or proposition, it's an and proposition. And being able to effectively communicate that and activate against that in a way that demonstrates that is sometimes challenging. But I think that we're still on the path and a journey of figuring that out, and I think we've made a lot of strides, but I know many companies struggle with that.
Janine, I saw you nodding your head. Did you have anything to add on that topic before we move on?
No, I just completely agree with Terrence. Like yeah, I agree with him 100%.
Yeah.
Politicizing some of these issues. I mean, we're in a political country, so it makes things difficult, but it's not just a matter of like, or it's just a matter of treating people with respect and understanding that people are currency and social currency matters.
Right.
So he hit the nail on the head.
We're talking about challenges. Speaking of challenges, we're amid a great resignation, a great reshuffle, a big quit, call it what you will. People are leaving their jobs at record rates for better paying ones or ones with better management. They're pursuing their passions or starting businesses. Is this a DEI issue? Janine, let's start with you. Are people seeking better DEI policies and benefits and moving along that way? Or is this just a
One,
general labor trend?
No, I think it's people, so excuse my language, but people want to work for companies who give a shit about them, right? So it's like when you feel truly connected to the brand and when you feel like the brand actually cares about you and the company values you, your family, your health, your future, and gives you a path toward upward mobility, you're more likely going to want to work for that company. And I think that now with millennials and Gen Zs, like I'm a millennial, like I am a previous entrepreneur. So to work for a company who has strong values matters. And so I think that's what people are really waking up to, which is so inspiring and so encouraging on the equity front when it comes just to like investing your energy into your own work. And we're just seeing that trend, right? People want to work for companies who give them the freedom and flexibility to spend time with their families, to where they don't feel like they have to go to the office every day, but where they can go and spend time doing the things that they love to do and also investing in their knowledge, in their education, when you have companies who are offering these types of issues. And additionally, when it comes to internal groups of self-identification and allowing yourself to be amongst a community within a community. So, for example, there are Black and African American focused organizations, there are female focused organizations, there are LGBTQ plus focused organizations, all within our larger organization. I think that when you start to implement things of that nature, you do start to develop talent retention, and you also start to attract really high quality talent. So all in all, I do think that it is a DEI issue, and that the fact that it is a DEI issue will have to cause organizations, startups, and larger corporations, enterprises alike, to start thinking differently about DEI and not just thinking about the unconscious bias that everybody thinks diversity is.
Absolutely. Terrence, how has your role changed amid the Great Resignation? What are you doing differently?
Yes, I think that, Janine definitely hit a lot of the points. I think that how it's impacted me specifically in the work that we're doing. Um, I'll start with a stat, right? There was a study done that shows that roughly about 73 to 77% of what an employee experiences at work is um, impacted by their direct manager, right? So if you start with that, the work that I've been doing is how am I equipping leadership to be able to lead inclusively, right? For lack of a better term. So I fully appreciate that we're in a competitive market. Salary, bigger roles, those things are out there and they will continue to be out there. But I do think that the diversity initiative can be the competitive advantage, if you will, that organizations can pull on. So the work that I've been doing is really more around working with our leadership managers of people to say, how are you leading your team in a way that demonstrates that you value them as individuals, right? And that doesn't mean thinking that I treat everyone the same. It's about understanding that you're an individual and you might have different needs than this person. So, as a manager or as a leader, how am I doing that effectively? Because, look, if you do diversity effectively, studies show you could get a minimum impact of a 19% increase in the ability to retain diverse talent, right? And again, I know that there's market pulls around comp and bigger roles that sometimes you're just not going to be able to compete with. But what I'm doing is spending most of my time with the leaders of our organization to talk about how they lead, how they communicate. Because I think that when people are making decisions about, about jobs and positions, that old saying is people don't leave companies, right? They leave their job or they leave the manager. So we're targeting that, and we want to equip our leaders to be more effective leaders. And guess what? If you're a more effective leader as it relates to inclusivity, that'll make you just an overall better leader, right? Not just to women and people of color and LGBTQ individuals or veterans or people with disabilities, to everyone. And that's the skill set that we're continuing to push at Danone North America.
Yeah, that quality of really feeling appreciated is something that's intangible. And something that both of you have said is what's changed since 2020 is that CEOs are taking diversity more seriously. They're trying to attract and retain talent from underrepresented backgrounds. But DEI is not easy to implement. Janine, what do more CEOs need to do when it comes to implementing DEI or incorporating it into their business strategy?
So there is a tweet that I can't remember who tweeted it, but he said, hire phenomenal talent and get the hell out of their way. I think it's really important to not, granted, it's a business at the end of the day, we all have to think about expenses. But I think that when you invest money into high quality talent and into high quality people who understand what they're doing and are able to lead within themselves and then be able to push the organization forward, you will see better results. And so I think, to Terrence's point, on that individual front, it's so important to have a hiring manager who understands the strengths of building a team and understands where one person may be stronger and another person may be weaker, and figures out how to mesh them so that the team is moving effectively, and where that hiring manager or where that supporting manager can then be more of a resource and a guide and less of a manager. Because at the end of the day, once you have diversity of thought and you have people who are coming from these different spaces, the thought processes that come from that are next level. And I've seen it. I've seen it within startups and I've seen it within enterprise organizations. And because I'm a linguist, I understand how that works in terms of different levels of proficiency, we'll call it, and how that effectiveness, when you combine people at different levels, can really plan out as a team. And so I would say overall, really understanding the mechanisms of individualism and having that empathy to meet people where they are, but also give them the vision to be able to propel them forward and motivate them to move forward is the most important thing. And that's what I've seen a lot of when it comes to the high growth successful startups who started, out of their garage and are now on 40-50 billion-dollar valuations. So a focus on people is really important.
I love that. You mentioned empathy and vision. Another challenge is turning ideas into action. Terrence, do you speak with CEO Shane Grant? How do you buy executive buy-in? Or how do you get executive buy-in, I should say?
Yes, no, it's very important. I consider it to be that executive buy-in, the alignment. The way that I do this, and I'll use an example or an analogy that I like to use that, and I've discussed this with our CEO Shane Grant frequently, which is you have to, as a diversity professional, you have to appreciate that there are people that everyone is kind of similar to what Janine just said about meeting people where they are, but where they are is first you have to figure out where they are. And one way to do that is I like to call it's like a 3H approach, which is, the head, the hands, the heart, and the head, right? And if you go with the head and the heart, the head is about, do I need to show you analytics? Do I need to show you the spending power of diverse communities? Do I need to show you the impact that a higher level of engagement can have on productivity? Do I need to show you stats? Or you can go at the heart. Do I need to talk to you about the fact that if someone feels like they're not included, how does that make them feel, right? Those types of things.
Right.
And then you go to the hand. So once you figure out, is it the heart? Is it the hand? Is it the head? Or is it a little bit of both? And then once I have them aligned, now it's the hands, which is, what do I do now? Like, let me do something. And that's the approach. As I understand, there's different ways to connect with different people. And working directly with Shane and our senior leadership team, we've implemented it in that way, understanding that what drives people to take action. Because what I'll say in summary of that is that if you really want results, people have to be driving this in a way that they believe it, right? Mm-hmm. And that's, for me, is if you believe it because it's the numbers and I show you stats and that makes you believe it, and then you can go forward authentically. Or if I can go after your heart and you really care about how people feel and those types of things, and then you're going to go after it authentically. But I think that what we've done is try to give room for both of those approaches and then go forward with speed.
Absolutely. Terrence, speaking of challenges, I want to ask, are there limits to DEI? I would be remiss not to note that in March 2021, 2 shareholder groups ousted Emmanuel Faber from his CEO position at Danone Global, arguing that he was too progressive. What might you tell leaders who might fear the same outcome for themselves?
Sure. I especially as I mentioned before, when you're talking about in diversity and some of the work we're doing in this politicized atmosphere we're in, it's a valid question. First, what I'll say is around our leadership is that, we understand that we've had a leadership change at Danone, and what we've talked about and what our leaders have said is that although we've changed leadership, at Danone, we haven't changed our strategic direction and our beliefs and our vision. And as a company, we continue to operate in a way that is a frame of action that is really part of our dual project heritage, right? We want to do good for business, but we also want to do good for society. So no matter if we had a leadership change or not, that hasn't changed.
Right. So the values.
Now, in terms of your question around the challenges and can you go too far, I think is that, look, I'm very direct and say, as an organization, we're not a non-for-profit, right? I understand that. But I think that the more that you can do as an organization and as a leader and as a CEO to connect the fact that consumers, job candidates, our stakeholders, our partners, our suppliers, they care about what we're doing in this spot. So, the work that we're doing, to me, is aligned to our business because people care. Especially now, more and more consumers, they we have a saying that we vote with our dollars, right? You buy things that what you buy says something about who you are, and more consumers are starting to make purchases based on that. And we at Danone feel very positive, and we feel very proud of the fact that we've been able to still maintain our dual purpose in terms of impacting society and as well as our business. So we'll continue to do that. I think like as your question says, the challenge is I don't think you can go too far. I think it's about communicating the connections that the work that you're doing has.
Right.
Right. And it benefits your business in the long run, but it also benefits our communities, which is so important to us. So that hasn't changed.
Janine, what are your insights on balancing both the investor demands for profit with the demand for a value-driven company?
Oh my gosh, I love this question. I've always been a firm believer that you can do well by doing good. And I think that by thinking about sustainable issues and also just thinking about more inclusive issues on various fronts, whether it relates to like social populations, to the environment, to regenerative solutions. I think that there is profit to be had. On the investor side, there is profit. There has to be profit because that's how they that's how they return their funds. So on the business side, we're starting to see more funds be able to, one, take into consideration the disparities of venture capital, which is clear with the emergence of so many phenomenal fund managers. And then two, focusing on companies that are actually reinvesting into their own communities, whether on a local scale, national scale, or global scale. And so for a lot of the traditional, I would say, old school venture capital who's still kind of stuck in the past, they, I hope, are starting to see it, but with a lot of emerging funds, specifically female-led funds, minority-led funds, and also ESG-focused funds, we're starting to see that profit and purpose can exist simultaneously, which excites me personally because I love, impact. It's just, who doesn't love impact, right? When other people are effectively seeing change being done, that's the best. That's the whole point of investing. So that's what I think.
I love that. Both of you are speaking to the growing business case for purpose and for value. How are you both feeling about the future of DEI? Janine, let's start with you.
Oh my gosh, I'm actually really excited. Like sometimes reading the stats of DEI when it relates to just accessibility, equity, inclusion, sometimes it's overwhelming because that's 100% my world of being embedded, working really hard to get more founders who are underestimated funded. However, I'm very optimistic because there are some phenomenal leaders coming into this market who are not allowing previous institutionalized like systems to deter them from doing what they need to do, which is creating impact and doing it at scale. And so sometimes I can get a little overwhelming in terms of the data when you see stats like less than 2% of venture capital is allocated to female founders, less than 1% of venture capital is allocated to Black female founders. However, I'm very optimistic, but also realistic, and it's going to take time. It's not all going to happen overnight. But I think once there's this collective shift that I personally feel is happening, especially here in Miami, then you're going to start to see some positive change. So all in all, I'm super excited.
Terrence, what about you? How are you feeling?
Oh, same thing. I am so optimistic. It's exciting in the directions that we're going in. One of the things that I'm very excited about is this which is not new, but it seems to have an additional focus, which is the need or the kind of desire to have transparency around your diversity, your supplier spend with diverse companies, right? So it's connecting also to what Janine is talking about and does. I'm super excited about that. I think the notion of using whether it's African American or Hispanic or Latino or LGBT owned or Asian owned media agencies, for instance, to do our marketing work, that's super exciting because it accomplishes so much. one is it's going to give us access to just new ideas, right? Fresh ideas. Number two, usually those are smaller owned businesses, and a small business is usually located in your local community. So by working with these organizations, you're driving the economic, kind of growth within your own local community in which you work in and your employees live in, as well. So that's exciting. And then lastly, creating wealth in diverse communities is just so important. And we've all heard about that. Again, similar to what we talked about earlier. People have talked about it, we've heard about it, but what are you really doing about it? And at Danone North America, I'm excited that we've made a pledge via our relationship with Group M to increase our spend with African American owned agencies by 2%. And when many companies make these types of pledges, whether it's 2% or a couple of percent, we're talking about a percentage of hundreds of millions of dollars.
Right.
And that's huge to me. So I'm super excited that we're not just at the layer, but we're going deeper within these topics. And that to me is going to lead to real impact and change.
Amazing. Last question. What's one tangible takeaway CEOs or managers can learn from your work? Anything that's really, really fueled success or something to avoid at all costs? Terrence, let's start with you.
I would say it's easy. Authenticity. You have to be authentic. Be authentic to yourself and be authentic to your business. When many companies at the height of some of the protests and racial injustice that was taking place, as Janine mentioned earlier, many companies ran to social media and wanted to do posts. But for many companies, that might have been the first time you've ever posted about anything regarding diversity and inclusion, and it might not have turned out too well, right? So for me, it's about, if they can take anything from my work, it's about being authentic. Danone, in terms of the way we interact with the community, is tied to our purpose. We get involved in, bringing health through food. That's not outside of our wheelhouse. Like, that's right in our wheelhouse. So we're not doing something that people would question and say, like, why would you all of a sudden do that? And it seems inauthentic. So I would say for any leaders or CEO, be authentic in terms of both yourself and the way that you talk about diversity and internalize it, and also in terms of your company and how you activate against it.
Janine, what about you? What's one takeaway for leaders?
I would say for sure, listen first, speak later. It's great to want to take a stance, but when it comes to something, whether if you're an expert or whether you're novice, I think it's really important to just listen to the people around you first and listen with your eyes as well, not just with your ears. Kind of take note, observe of what's happening within your own organization. Talk to the people within your organization and also externally, and then start to act. Because in the same sense where some people try to jump in and just act without really knowing deeply rooted problems or systems, I think that's when the intention and the authenticity, like Terrence said, can be misconstrued as being tone deaf. So I always recommend, in embarking upon any journey, listen first to the people around you and then act second with tangible and actionable steps.
I love that. Thank you both, Janine and Terrence. I found this incredibly informative and very real. We got insight into DEI practices at a top US company, heard about the new trends and challenges in the diversity and inclusion space, and got tangible takeaways on how to advance DEI within your own organization. These are topics we'll continue to cover closely at Insider, and I definitely recommend you check out our reporting online or on social media. Again, thank you all for joining. Back to you, Brandon.
Thank you, Marguerite. And thank you, Janine and Terrence, for such an inspiring conversation. And thank you again to all of our panelists and speakers. We're out of time, but the discussion doesn't have to end here. These are topics, as Marguerite mentioned, that we will continue to cover diligently at Insider in a variety of ways. We all have a part in creating the future of work. What's yours? Please remember to share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag InsiderEvents. In a few moments, a survey will pop up on your screen. I'm Brandon T. Harden. Thank you all for joining.